right. Good evening, everybody. Let me know if you can hear me. Thanks for coming out late tonight. Well, I guess no one else is doing anything tonight, it looks like. Anyway, so we're getting started here. That's better. We're getting started here tonight. We're going to take a look at the Whick's recent panel on leftism and anti-Semitism. And we're going to talk about it a little bit because Jesus Christ, it's bad. Like, really bad. And not necessarily like... Let's get into it.
Welcome. One talk based in leftist ideals, like intrinsically, something that is in. We're going to be talking about anti-Semitism on the left. Is it a real problem? Is it something that is indicative or based in leftist ideals, like intrinsically? That's the word I'm looking for, intrinsically. Is it intrinsic to leftism, or is it simply something
That's why you write out your introduction.
that's been overblown? It's a cudgel being used by people to bully leftists and distract from the real problems at hand. We're going to talk about it.
So here's the first thing I have to mention. It's like when you're talking about something like this, like left is a huge range, and people have brought this up about Whick panels before, but leftist is a huge range of views and ideas and concepts with a vast group of people who nominally call themselves leftists, and some of them aren't, to be perfectly fair, and some of them very much are. And like, the question to ask, first of all, is when you're talking about the leftist and whether or not a particular issue is a problem for any organization or any loose affiliation in this case, the first thing you have to ask is, who are we talking about? What defines the group? Because, like, if you pay attention to how some of these people particularly interact, like, Whick just finds random accounts and replies to them on Twitter and then points them out as evidence of anti-Semitism. And this gets into what we talked about with me and Josiah and Portland is Burning, talked to him about previously, is that you pick random people who don't have any real authority. What's the point of even bringing it up? Like, a random person on Twitter is not going to decide what's happening in the world. So the first question you have to ask, and the problem is that people don't bring it up. They don't really define it. Like, what is the real problem? And like someone like Sockdom Left, who has a very different idea of who's on the left than maybe Brianna Wu does, to kind of bring it around and say, well, what are we talking about here, is kind of the first thing I would hope someone would ask.
Brought together a wonderful group of guests, and I want to give them all a chance get going. Is Counterpoints? I hope he will be here.
Mercifully, Counterpoints doesn't show up because nothing he's ever said has made anything better.
Soon. But either way, the show must go on. And we're going to start with Ali the Spurg. Go ahead.
Yeah, so my name is Ali. I think there's less of an anti-Semitic issue. There is obviously anti-Semitism happening within the left. However, I think there's a big conflation between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, and I think those two things need to be separated.
Okay, we'll get into it. Miss Brianna, please.
Yes, my name is Brianna Wu. I'm executive director at Rebellion PAC. I also run special projects over at Progressive Victory. And yeah, my point, I think we're going to have a lot of agreement here tonight. I think all of the...
Which begs the question of why you're on the panel in the first place. Also, like, PAC directors don't talk out loud. They just give out money.
Understand that Israel's foreign policy directionally has been very...
I feel like the worst person in American politics today is the consultant who told Brianna Wu that she'd sound smarter if she said directionally every time she spoke.
It's been really destructive and harmful and violent and disproportionate towards the Palestinian people. At the same time, I'm really seeing a lot of discourse on the left that, in my view, certainly falls into anti-Semitism. And I think we're doing the famous leftist playbook where we go after our own. And I think if we're serious about building a coalition to provide real pushback against Israel's foreign policy. I think it's really important.
So when you're talking about, let me move this. There we go. Make sure you can still hear me. Can you still hear me? Excellent. When you're talking about building a coalition, you have to say, who am I building a coalition with? Like, that's an important thing. Like, everyone, everyone who's involved in this conversation isn't interested in building a coalition with you. So you have to talk about who you're building a coalition with. That's meaningless nonsense if you don't have a clear objective to talk about it. How is anti-Semitism harming your ability to build a coalition with specific partners?
That we nip this anti-Semitism in the bud.
Excellent. We'll see how it goes. Karl, Max, what you got?
So I think that there is a lot of issues with how people have spoken about this, but I think that the issues come from the same people that we always see saying the worst shit. It is the usual kind of tankies. It's the usual suspects, right? And these people, though they've always been there to always say really stupid things, they've never had a real effect because these aren't people who actually take action. And really, what are they going to influence in Palestine? I know that these people are annoying and shitty, but I don't think they're, first of all, mostly, I don't think the leftists are anti-Semitic. I think they're people who want to be radical and they want to LARP, right? And I think the people who are anti-Semitic aren't leftists and are people who are just anti-Semites looking for an excuse to be anti-Semitic, right? So all in all, I think that there are issues, but I think that people are focusing on the wrong ones, and especially giving into Israeli propaganda that any criticism of Israel might actually be rooted in definite anti-Semitism, which is something that I see being accused a lot, even when it's not necessarily accurate.
Okay, well, we'll see how it goes.
All right, I'm working on the audio again. I have to... Here, how about this? I don't know how much closer I can get to the microphone at this point. Oh, I am quiet. Let's turn up the gain. They honest to God shouldn't give me so many boxes. All right, let's see how this goes.
Thanks for being here and looking forward to the discussion. Last but not least, at least until Counterpoints arrives, Sock Done Left. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there is some degree of anti-Semitism on the left on downplaying deaths by Jewish people and refusing to condemn that. Simultaneously, I think it's important to recognize that anti-Semitism on the left is something like 5 times less common than it is on the political right, and anti-Semitism on the right has political power. People like Donald Trump are actively calling for the slaughter of Palestinians. And not in terms of anti-Semitism, but just bigotry on the right has institutional power in a way that it does not on the left. I would totally agree with Karl Max that the types of people who tend to be the most radical, the most LARPy or whatever, tend to also be the people with the least institutional power.
And this is a really important point that goes to what Whick talks about, because Whick seems to think that if he intercepts those people, he's done good. And that's obviously not the case. You very clearly need to speak to people who have power, because people who have power are the ones who can change things. So again, random person on Twitter who says horrible things, it's obviously horrible, but it's not impactful.
And so, yes, it exists, and yes, it's a problem, but only insofar as any insane beliefs are a problem. Is posadism and wanting a post-nuclear socialism a problem? Yes, but I don't think anyone should give much of a shit. So it's more important than that. It's bigger than posadism, but yeah.
Fair enough. Well, I guess I'll stand in for Counterpoints till it gets here, and I'll give my criticism of what I've seen. Okay. I talked to Lonerbox last night, and his position resonated with me. It's not so much that I see anti-Semitism coming directly from the left, right? They're not going out and hating Jews, etc. But the problem I do see, and it is I think a problem that is bigger than some on this seem to think, they run cover for it. Anytime we see any kind of anti-Semitic remark by someone.
So this is really important because I don't understand what the hell he means by saying they run cover for it. Because like it's not like anything that I say or you say or anyone else says on Twitter is going to cause Hamas to be able to be more effective in doing acts of terror. By the same token, anything that I say against the IDF isn't necessarily, and I did today. If you go check our Twitter account, I pointed out that the reported behavior of the IDF is not is at this point tantamount to murder. Like anything I say about that doesn't make it easier for the IDF to do that, and it doesn't stop the IDF. So like this kind of concept, like the idea of like where they're running cover for it, is really weird and undefined, and someone should have pushed back on that.
In a Palestinian protest or something, when we bring it up, I'm inundated by what I call the butt brigade. Right?
You're not, first of all. Second of all, people will notice, particularly if you watch what Whick does, that he doesn't bring up anything but Palestinian, anti-Palestinian things. Like he has a very clear bias. You look at other people's statements or our statements, for example, and like on the one hand, I'll turn around and condemn Hamas and Likud in the same breath because they're both players to this particular event, and they're both intertwined in the event. Like this feels like an incredibly virtue signaling thing. Like I don't feel. We will set up for you, Gabrielle, a butt brigade call, a beacon, so the butt brigade can show up. But we cannot leave out that Whick seems to be incredibly one-sided, and it's a really weird one side too. Because I'm going to be perfectly frank, what happened on October 7th is horrific. It's inhuman, but it's over now. But the situation in Gaza, people are starving, they're being bombed, civilians are being killed. They don't have food, they don't have water, they don't have medicine, they don't have access to healthcare. Israel is punishing foreign nationals who are in Gaza from countries that have criticized them by not letting them out. Like these are dictatorial actions. Like this is horrifying what the IDF is doing. So speaking to that, because it is an ongoing thing, is in my mind infinitely more important than sitting there and continuously bringing up how horrible October 7th was. We know how horrible October 7th was. It's not going to change. What's happening now is infinitely more important.
Right. So what I mean by the butt brigade is when I say, oh man, those people pulling down those posters, that's pretty gross.
Guess what? I care not a single lick about posters. So I know Pippa watched with me Food Shop's coverage of this, and Food Shops is getting so upset every time someone brought up the posters. But the posters are an important thing to talk about because the posters are being put up in places where this event hasn't happened. So like, if I'm putting up a missing dog poster in a neighborhood, the reasonable expectation is that you might find the dog that is missing in the neighborhood in which I put the posters. These posters serve no purpose other than to enrage you, to make you furious at Hamas, and by extension, Gaza. The posters are part of a much larger pattern of behavior where people who are pro-Israel and Zionist will take a action that is provocative and put it out in front of you and dare you to talk back. It's incredibly abusive behavior. It's the kind of thing we shouldn't tolerate. Like if a friend did this, I would be saying, no, you're not a friend anymore. Get the fuck out of my life. This is horrifying behavior on this path. They put these posters up, and these posters serve no purpose other than to inflame passions. which they do, and then a person comes and they take it down, and someone's always watching because they want to get it up on camera, right? So like, seems kind of coincidental to me in the kind of the way that's not a coincidence. And then they'll say, look at this anti-Semitism. And like Whick goes on to talk to Kid Not Kin and call it intrinsically anti-Semitic, which is the most idiotic statement I think I've heard all week. You cannot have something be intrinsically anti-Semitic. And what I mean by that is pretty simple. Things become hate symbols because we imbue them with actions that make them hate symbols. In and of itself, burning a cross in someone's yard would not mean much unless you have the symbolism established ahead of time, the threat established ahead of time by a KKK individual towards that African American family. This thing is dangerous. It's horrifying. It says that it's a threat because of what it means, because of how it is imbued with meaning. Symbolism is only as important as we make it. So in and of itself, a poster is not posters are not intrinsically Jewish or Semitic, if you want to be technical about it. Tearing down a poster is also not intrinsically Semitic. Whether you think it's good optics or not is irrelevant, because the point of it is to cause this particular fight that they're having right here. And it's designed to get people who don't think terribly deeply into the scope of this problem, who are not familiar with how Israel works and how they manipulate information. And it's very upfront and it's very in your face if you know what is happening. Yeah, they have none of the subtlety of, for instance, Russia. It's designed to show you, like, get people like this who are not sophisticated on this topic to turn around and do their dirty work for them. They want to equivocate any kind of objection at all to the actions of Israel and the Israeli government, and in particular Likud, as anti-Semitic, so that they can dismiss all criticism as anti-Semitic. Because you turn around and you say, well, why did you blow up this refugee camp twice? Oh, you're being such an anti-Semite. No, I'm not. I'm asking a legitimate question. That's the problem that happens here. And there's other actions that you see people like this do. Like the state itself engages in this. Look at how the state Twitter account behaved in the previous month. How they picked a fight with, what's her face from Sweden? There's a climate activist. Like, why was that necessary? It wasn't necessary. But she has enough pull to move people away from Israel's narrative. So now they have to smear her in order to keep up this narrative. The other day, the Israeli delegation to the United Nations turned around in this very offensive action. They placed yellow stars of David on their clothes to try to imply that criticism of the actions of the Israeli military in Gaza are akin to committing the Holocaust. This is designed to shift the concept. It's designed to move the Overton window in Israel's favor, and it's successful. We understand that it's successful because how many states in the United States have laws against criticism of Israel? How many countries in the past month have banned pro-Palestinian demonstrations, irrespective of whether they show support for Hamas? Israel has an outsized influence in our public discourse, and they know what they're doing, and they know what they're doing is wrong. That is a problem. That is a bigger problem than any random Twitter account, or even someone like Second Thought being anti-Semitic. It is the surrender of sovereignty, of our ability to live by and abide by our own Bill of Rights, that's unacceptable. And I hesitated before saying this tonight because I know how it sounds, but it's the end of that equation. Like, you inescapably arrive at it. Israel is the ally that makes you prefer your enemies for the United States. It has no real strategic value in any real sense. We can get plenty of countries, Iraq, Yemen, Saudi Arabia. We could get plenty of countries to host American troops, to have American military bases. We do not have to do business with Israel.
But Israel. But what is the IDF doing in Gaza? But
those are the things that are happening now, Whick. That's why they're important.
Netanyahu, like every single time. And I think that this minimizes a very real problem. And while it may not have, these people may not have any institutional power now, we are talking people with millions of followers.
Again, who? Which individuals in particular?
Millions of sub counts, right? Big, dwarfing us all. That's not actually an issue, and that's not something we actively going ahead and confronting and fighting against. Go ahead.
I think that's dead on, Whick. And I think one of the most basic tenets of morality, like if you go read your Noam Chomsky, is the same moral standards you expect of other people, you hold yourself to, right? So I think if all of us very correctly want to call out racism, sexism, transphobia, homophobia on the right, I think it's really important to have our own house in order. So I fully...
Okay, let's talk about this statement for a moment, because again, even failing to provide a definition causes this statement to be problematic. But like, let's assume we did have a definition. I do not have to. This is a weird thing that people fall into, that they seem to think that I must, or any person must, present themselves in a certain way in order to be able to do a certain thing. And if they do not, then they cannot do it. Then the hypocrisy is too much to bear. And if you want to have a conversation about hypocrisy at a given time, that's all well and good. But to be perfectly honest, if, for example, another streamer says something anti-Semitic, it is not incumbent upon me to say something about that before I address a much more pressing problem, such as talking about the IDF's campaign in Gaza. So this is like, to get past the gobbledygook here, this is just like moralizing and without any real value to it.
Fully agree with my other panelists.
I'm perfectly fine with anti-medics. It's lovely, actually, to have Zofran if you're sick.
Have said, I believe Sostan left. It was you who said it was like 5 times worse on the right. I haven't seen that study. That seems very believable to me. I agree with you proportionally. It's probably not as big of a problem, but that should just mean it's that much easier to denounce. And Whick, to your point, anyone that has talked about this anti-Semitism on the left, like my mentions have been a war zone for days here. And I get
in fairness, Brianna Wu's mentions are usually a war zone because she says stupid crap.
Attacked with the worst stereotypes, telling me that like I'm for Palestinian genocide, with people that will not look and say I've been extremely critical of Israel's foreign policy for literally 15 years on Twitter. There are tons of public statements out there they can find. There's my own statements within.
Yeah, there's another problem we have, Brianna, is we don't actually know what you think until someone turns around and leaks your group chats.
Last 2 weeks, and it so instantly becomes so heated that it is an environment where it's very difficult to push back on this stuff. So what I need from my friends on the left, I agree with you. We need a change in foreign policy. We do need to denounce this tactic Israel is engaged in that is not going to give them the policy outcome that they want. But
say what the tactic is. Be specific. Stop talking. You can tell Brianna Wu is a bad politician. Like, you can tell why people didn't vote for her.
We need to be able to call out anti-Semitism on our own side. It's so obvious. It's the most basic requirement of being the thing that you, like, having the same standards for yourself you expect of others.
Just to speak briefly to that study that I mentioned, I posted it in the like group chat thing. It's Royden and Hirsch.
Yeah, I'm looking over now. Yeah.
Go. What's that?
Cool.
Yeah, I'm looking over now. Continue though, please. Just
all I was saying on specific statements like, quote, Jewish people have too much power in America. It's like 5% of liberals and 40% of conservatives. So when I said 5, you could even say it's 8 times. It's a lot of young, and this is young conservatives.
The other thing to understand is that there's a very messed up relationship between conservative Christians, evangelical conservative Christians, and Zionists. And like it's not a healthy relationship. I suspect that the Zionists are perfectly well aware that a lot of evangelical Christians want Israel to exist in order to foment the very war that they think will bring about Armageddon and the end times and the rapture and all that nonsense. This is obviously not a healthy relationship, but this is where a lot of the impetus comes from for pro-Israeli laws in the United States. It's particularly the state level, is this relationship between the Christian right and Zionists.
Conservatives too. Older conservatives are less anti-Semitic, but gripers are unironically the future of a third of the Republican Party. So just institutional power again.
I hear you, but do you agree that we need to structurally call this out and get our own house in order?
I also have a feeling that the exact same consultant who told her about directionally told her about structurally. It does not mean a thing.
Because if we don't, I really worry we're going to become a version.
Like, what does it mean to structurally call us out? In order for something to have structure, it has to be planned, which would imply that you would at some point define who the left is and who on the left is saying those things and who needs to be called out, which is something you have not done yet. Yeah, you have to do the groundwork. You can't just sit here and say words, Brianna. It's not how the world works. Everyone can see that you just didn't do your homework last night.
Of the Republicans.
I think it should always be okay. Go ahead.
Isn't this an issue that we see with every single conflict, though? I mean, if you criticize Israel, you'll get called a Hamas supporter, and if you criticize Hamas, you'll get called like a Zionist. It's just something that will happen, especially with the internet, right? I feel like we need to find the power in saying this is stupid and just ignoring them and then moving on. I know that sounds like.
Yeah, I actually tend to agree with this statement very heavily. Like, why am I giving the time of day to people who are not willing to engage with nuance? Like, the fact that there's a certain thing to be said that individuals who are giving these random Twitter accounts and these random individuals the time of day make them more prevalent and more powerful than they actually ever would be. Like, the thing you have to remember, and people like Brianna who are bad at this because she doesn't know what she's doing, is that my objective has to be to push what I have decided to do with this channel. It does not mean I need to answer every stupid thing every person says. And the minute she figures that out, the minute she's going to start to become effective.
Kind of dismissive, but I think that a lot of I think there's a lot of benefit to ridiculing silly ideas and to just moving away from them, because these people are stupid. I think the best method, the best course of action is to make fun of them, make it clear that these sorts of views are silly, they're over the top, they're exaggerated, they're not worth it. I mean, you see me doing this all the time, right? Because that's the way I think you can effectively make ideas, less popular. And I feel like that's kind of the only real way we have, right? I mean, what else are we going to do? You can't really exile these people or something, You can tell them it's stupid and then kind of move on.
Go ahead.
Let's go socked on left, then woo, and then
All I wanted to say is that I think the amount of criticism should be roughly proportional to the amount of power. And so vanguardists do have a decent amount of power. I want to say when you look at all of YouTube views or something, they represent a fifth of socialist YouTube views, something like that. It's not nothing. They have a lot less power in the real world even than that. They don't represent even a fifth of the real world socialist movements. They're a tenth. And socialist movements themselves have very little power. So I guess the point to me is
yeah, and if Whick actually named someone like Second Thought in this video, they'd smash him like a bug.
I think it's worth calling out and then being okay, I've called out this bad belief. I can't change all these people's minds. Saying it over and over isn't going to change their mind. They hate everything I have to say. So I'm going to focus on who's actually doing the killing of 900.
And look at this right here. The panel should have ended right here when he said this. That's the whole ball game. There's nothing else to say after this. I need to focus on the thing that's actually happening. I've already said about the other thing. This right here really illustrates what I feel is the moral bankruptcy of this entire panel. Is this was it. This was the thing. Sockdom Left said it. Now we move on. Talk about a thing that we can actually affect. But we're going to keep going. Also, we're not going to do this entire panel. It was painful to begin with.
Sorry, 9,000 people. It's Israel, right? It's the democratic politicians who are refusing a ceasefire. It's to focus on where the harms are proportionally.
I hear what you're saying. I think I would push back on the idea that we need to mock it as the best thing. I think if you go out there and talk to your Jewish friends right now, they're legitimately hurting, just like your Muslim friends are hurting.
Okay. I feel for you if you have a problem. I feel for you if you feel scared. But you have steps that you can take right now if you're a Jewish person to address this. Law enforcement has overwhelmingly been on your side about these things, both abroad and in Israel. Unless you're speaking out against the war, and then you're just trashed Israel. So, I guess here's my point. The Palestinian people in Gaza are dying. Like, again, this cannot be overstated. Someone commits a crime such as vandalizing a mural, call the police. Do what you're supposed to do as a citizen of whatever country. However, do not pretend that you cannot solve this particular issue until you have managed to figure out who all the anti-Semites are, according to you. This is
hurting. I think all of us were probably moved when we saw Hassan crying on Leftovers.
I was not.
Or at least I was. But if you go talk to your Jewish friends right now, especially progressive Jewish friends, I've universally found they're in a lot of pain. They feel betrayed. They don't understand how, from their point of view, they've shown up for gay people and trans people.
The objective is not to go, well, I showed up for your civil rights, so can I please do a genocide? That's not how this works. It's not a tit for tat.
And movement after movement, unionization. It's hard to think of a progressive movement in the United States that has not had a lot of Jewish people there. And they're not seeing their friends stand up for them right now. So I think that mocking is an important tool, but I also think that it's important for non-Jews like me and hopefully the people in the audience to stand up and say, you know what, this doesn't speak for us. We can be critical of Israel's foreign policy, but let's not bring American Jews into this. I think that's actually...
Who brought them in, though? Like you need to talk about who this is. This is the most frustrating part about dealing with Branawu is she clearly doesn't know much about this topic. Like, I talked last night a little bit about the fact that me and Hetman have been arguing about this for the past week, and like, it was a pretty much a slap down thing where I said, no, you're wrong. We are now talking about a problem where we are ignoring the deaths of people being caused every day by the IDF. This is a problem that's being called out in the UN. This is a problem that the United States military is we're getting information that how horrified the State Department DOD is about this. This is a silly argument. It's absolutely silly. I will happily show up for a person who's in trouble, but at this point we need to talk about, there's no buts about, there's no excepts, there's no buts, there's no other factor to talking about what's happening in Gaza right now, other than the IDF is murdering Gazans. The conversation has to begin and end there.
Actually really important.
Just a real quick housekeeping thing. Counterpoints reached out. He isn't going to be able to make it today, unfortunately. We hope that
praise be,
his situation improves, and that's okay. But I do want to say this as well, right? And this is the Sock Done Left, just briefly. So we talk about how these ideas don't have institutional power, but we can see the effect that it's having on the left and the division it's causing on the left, which is going to be a problem coming.
As opposed to the fact that the left was unified before October 7th.
into the
Again, define the left, because
2024 elections. Look at the DSA. There's been several high-profile people who have nothing or do, et cetera, et cetera. Big name, like, is that? I don't. It just bothers me that we're just dismissing this as if it's nothing. I don't know. Maybe it's a.
Well, what I would say.
Well, Whick, I suggest you get yourself, stand up, you go to your coffee pot and pour yourself a big old mug and get the fuck over it.
To that is most of the people who were anti-electoral before are anti-electoral now. Like, the actual shift has been way smaller. Mike was anti-electoral before. Hassan was.
We're gonna skip ahead. This was silly.
A really detailed conversation about what the cost is of Netanyahu's.
It's true if Israel has the right to exist, which is why I asked you to clarify, because from a Zionist, Israel has the right to exist.
So last night, President Sunday talked about how no country has the right to exist, and like, I suppose on a perfectly ephemeral and like perfectly theoretical level, that's true. But on a certain level, a country is going to have to win its right to exist by defending itself. The problem is Israel has hit this mark already. There is no set of circumstances in which Hamas could actually succeed in killing every Israeli. There's just not going to happen. To pretend that it would is silly. There's no set of circumstances in which an uprising in the West Bank will kill every Israeli. They are under the thumb of the Israeli people. It's virtually impossible for that to happen. So now we have to talk about what we have to come to terms with counterterrorism, and like we've written about counterterrorism as military scholars for hundreds of years, and at no point in any of those writings that I have read did we read about the fact that you should blow up people's houses. It's just that simple. What Israel is doing cannot be seen in any light as reasonable. And again, this is what we need to talk about. Not did second thought say something stupid? Of course, second thought said something stupid. Second thought very often says stupid things. But second thought is not, ordering airstrikes into Gaza.
Means everything Israel does is justified. It's a nationalism statement.
No,
From like the left, it can just be something like, please don't kick out all the Jews.
And this here applies to the same format from the river to the sea. Is it means different things coming from different people. And Brianna wants to parse Israel has the right to exist, but she's unwilling, and Whick is unwilling to parse from the river to the sea. I don't know. I just think that's maybe a little anti-Semitic of your own, isn't it?
Yeah, please don't like commit another.
And just one more thing. Yeah. I think a big problem with this issue and the way we talk about it is for a lot of people, we're watching people speak about this issue like it just happened on October the 7th, and this is the beginning of like all traumas and tragedies. And for the rest of us, some of us are looking at it like it's kind of hard to just be like, well, okay, let's focus on this one individual day when it's like histories have been happening,
Yeah, no, I really hear you about that. And let's just be really honest. I mean, I think that this is an electoral issue, at least here in the United States.
I want to point out how just heartless this statement from Brianna Wu is. He's going, I want to be really honest. First of all, no one believes that after that bullcrap you got caught in the month before. Second of all, you just took this person who is connected to the region and has a very tangible connection to what's happening and just said, well, it's really just an electoral issue. It's not an electoral issue. This is an issue of life or death. This is an issue of life or death for people. It's not just an electoral issue. Like, you should be ashamed of yourself, Brianna, for saying that.
I think we are really complicit in not looking at a lot of our areas of foreign policy. I mean, my God, look.
This has nothing, again, we're not talking about Iraq. We're not talking about Afghanistan. If you want to have those conversations, have them in the appropriate place. Right now, we are talking about Israel. We need to talk about what Israel is doing. I'm repeating myself, but I need to stress this point. This is an abortion of a panel.
Look at how long we were in Afghanistan. I don't think America ever had a really honest conversation about Iraq and the consequences of Bush's decision there. And we certainly have never had a really detailed conversation about what the cost is of Netanyahu's foreign policy, which has been enabled by the United States.
I wouldn't be terribly surprised if most Americans pick Netanyahu out of a lineup. To be perfectly frank, let alone understand what's happening about Israeli foreign policy. Also, Israeli foreign, like just that statement alone is a tacit admission that actions towards Palestine are actions towards another country. Like this is. I can't stress enough how much just she totally made this panel worse. She's almost a bigger clown than Whick on this issue.
Fully agree with that. At the same time, I've got to give you pushback and say, for the same reason, I've been extremely critical of the statement, defund the police. If you want to have a conversation in this country about reallocating the way that we provide public safety in this.
No, he wants to have a conversation about what's happening in Gaza right now. But you're sitting here screeching about defund the police for some goddamn reason. Like, you're just going all over the place. Incoherent. You can't even do a proper message statement. This is why you should just be the ATM machine.
This country and earmark more money for addiction, things like that, mental health, social services.
The big thing is that she's taking this very real issue and she's deflecting from it in order to try to look smart. It's offensive.
I'm on board with you, but
she's literally grandstanding on the back of dying children.
I do think there's a portion of the left that enjoys going to the most inflammatory, toxic rhetoric possible and daring people to disagree with them. And I think
that's interestingly what Israel does.
This particular statement, I understand that there's a historical possibility of saying this in good faith, but I think a lot of Jewish people read that and it sets off their Holocaust alarm.
I want to point something out really quick. Originally we were going to talk about Whick's lying stream about Sunday where he brought on Jenny Matrix and she made up a whole bunch of bullshit about how everything in the leaked group chats was misinterpreted and how Sunday knew this and lied, and it was all on several levels it was stupid to begin with. And I was going to do that, except a few days later Brianna Wu gets onto a Stardust panel and she had to be drunk or something. Like, she was not in her right mind. Starts screaming about all these things about how awesome Jenny Matrix is, despite the fact that a couple nights before, Jenny Matrix said, yeah, Brianna was the one telling me I was wrong. So I decided not to do that because I couldn't actually do any more damage to Whick's credibility than Brianna Wu did by herself. Like, it's plain to any kind of observer that's watched the situation at all that it was bullshit from the get-go. There is no use beating a dead horse. This kind of behavior, this grandstanding, this kind of like snake oil salesmanship on Wu's part is so indicative of what got her into trouble in the first place. Yes, she was down with COVID, air quotes. No. She's like, I'm too sick to talk on this panel. Then she comes in yelling about the panel, like about how awesome being a trans med is. Yeah, that's not, I have plenty of experience being sick and I know bullshit when I hear it. You'll notice that she takes pains not to actually speak to her opponent's points. You saw her do this too with Tim Pool, which is bad because Tim Pool is, already a awful person. So you just have two people who are completely unskilled at the art of actually speaking, talking past one another for however long, and it's boring. Yeah, that's like her saying COVID did that is exactly like Roseanne Barr going, I took medicine and it made me be a racist. That's not how that works.
So I think there are better ways to express that same sentiment.
Well, that's how Palestinian people and Arab people feel when we see I stand with Palestine or I stand with Israel, right? We like you stand with what they've been doing. You stand with like what we see. You stand with the dehumanization of like the Arabs, Muslims, and the Palestinians. You stand with the destabilization of the Palestinians. You stand with the displacing them, and that's what we see when we see I stand with Israel. So it's on the same side. That's why Whick, to your point, the whole like but this but that, there's a point to why we say that. There's a point why we bring up the other side in our arguments.
And here's the thing, anyone has talked about Israel, and I've done it for a long time before this. Anyone who's talked about Israel is used to what I like to call the hedging symphony, the ums, the ahs, where you're basically forced to sit and try to construct statements that encapsulate the entirety of the problem without necessarily being reductive. So someone doesn't turn around and call you anti-Palestinian or anti-Semitic. Is it still low? Hang on. I am as close to the mic as possible. I really can't. Yeah, I am. I can't see how to make this louder. I really can't. So like everyone is pretty used to the fact that they have to hedge their bets on this topic. So like her inability to even address it is really a problem.
Because it's constantly thrown in our faces.
I think that's fair. I think there's a lot of pain on both sides, and I think
acknowledge directly that person's pain, Brianna. You've got to acknowledge it directly.
I think Muslim people in the United States, I mean, people just forget about the Bush years and the aftermath of 9/11. There's, just in this country, without even getting into the history of that region, right? I think that's really fair. And I would hope in my public statements, I have not minimized that because it's not something I would want to do. I do see my Jewish friends hurting, though. And I do want to speak up about that.
In the again, in the spirit of counterpoints, that's frankly, Allie, I love you, but that's kind of bullshit, right? So let me tell you why. We don't have people going around ripping off the posters of killed Gazan children, right? We don't have that happening.
We don't have posters of.
We don't have the posters.
That's a good point too. Why not? Why are?
We're gonna skip this poster part. Let me know if it's still. Let me know if it's still too quiet. I threw the gain up a little bit.
Instead of
also, thank you, Dick.
Very alienated and hurt by the anti-Semitism right now. To say is, am I correct on this call that all of us would like to see less violence towards Palestinians and think that the actions are disproportionate? Does anyone disagree?
Okay. Brianna is talking about some nonsense here to start with. All right, let me turn it down. Hang on. I did try the filter and then I threw it up probably too much. Let's try this. Let's see how that goes. Someone coming from a Jewish background, it's complicated living at the moment. City of Sudan to protest in support of Palestine. Here's my thing. I get feeling hostile. I get that the feeling it could be you could be find that to be hostile. Um, let's try there. I get like I understand feeling hostile, but at the same time, there is a particular the problem I have with all these protests is everyone feels passionately. Even if they like and here's the thing, I think I've been pretty clear on this, especially when we started. Especially when they get started, like I talked about this when I did the panel the day of with Thucydides and American Anarchist. The solution to this particular problem cannot be one or the other. What we're really getting into at this point is you have two groups of people who want the same thing. They want, and one of them has effective control over it. I have been working with another creator, Star Panda TV, to do a video about this. You should look for that in the coming weeks. I'll put it up when it gets out here. Where I talk a little bit, like it's a very brief overview, like 8 minutes long, of the history that gets us from the British Mandate to Gaza. And like I talk a lot about the 48 war, and I talk a lot about the 67 war, and then I skip a bunch of stuff. Because it's not pertinent to this particular story. The history here is you're not going to find anyone who's in the right. Like for example, take the 48 war. The 48 war is typically known for the Nakba and how many Palestinians are expelled from their villages, killed, driven out. But by the same token, Jews living in the land were expelled as well. Those who ended up on the wrong side of the peace treaty are, for example, Jerusalem is noted in most histories pretty prominently, or West Jerusalem, I believe, specifically, is one of those places where Arabs controlled it up until the 67, and they expel people. So a whole bunch of people lost their homes. There's no like easy switch to this. There's no good solution that I can say we have to do. But I've seen some people, Destiny posted today, he's like, yeah, anyone who's calling for a single state solution doesn't know what they're talking about. And like everyone who I know who studied the topic extensively seems to think that what we have now is a two-state solution, and it's not working. And there's a thing there's a parallel to, I think, one of the things you see when there is police violence against African Americans. For example, Colin what's his face? He knelt during the national anthem, and this was seen as disrespectful. He was told not to do this, and he was told you cannot protest like this. And then people go and you find Ferguson, and you find Baltimore, and all the protests in the wake of George Floyd. Like, consider for a moment how much work had to be done to get George Floyd's killers to even stand trial. The whole planet had to protest against 5 police officers in America. I get why someone who would be afraid if they came upon a protest and saw someone saying from the river to the sea. I just don't know what the answer is to tell them not to do it. Because not all of them mean the same thing by it. You can't just automatically say, I know what's being meant. It's like I was saying in the beginning of the stream, symbolism is only as powerful as we make it. And it only means what we invoke into it. And there's a legitimate thing to watch out for, people going for dog whistles, but not everything is a dog whistle. I will be perfectly frank in what I know. I don't know nearly as many Palestinians as I would like, but I have met a couple in the last couple weeks who have been gracious enough to speak with me, and they've or people who are particularly interesting is like I've met a new friend while in the course of working with another creator who straddles both worlds, who has a Israeli father and a Palestinian mother, and who has people who died in Gaza and who died in Israel on the 7th. There's so much here, and there's so much that people want to say, and there's so much control over what's being said. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. What has to happen, so here's the thing. If you have a viable two-state is a Palestine that is powerful enough to resist Israel, which Israel is dead set against allowing. And to be perfectly honest, we talked with Commander McMillan a little bit the first time we did that show for the last update about the Donald Trump transferring the embassy to Jerusalem, and that being a clear sign that America is not neutral in this conflict, that they've taken Israel's side. I don't know that there is a neutral party. I don't know that there is any party that doesn't feel invested in it, because you look throughout the history of the region, particularly in the mix between Lebanon and Israel in the 70s and 80s. The Soviet Union was heavily involved in that. The Soviet Union was invested in the downfall of Israel. They have manipulated Israel to try to harm Ukraine. Yeah, there's also questions of like Israel surrenders a significant amount of sovereignty in a two-state or a one-state solution, which is a viable problem, but at the same time, they have not behaved well with sovereignty. Like, this is what we've gotten. Anyway, I want to try to get to some of the other stuff here.
Agree with that statement here. Okay,
I'm sorry,
great.
what was the statement again?
That the violence towards Palestinians at this point is beyond disproportionate, and that it is counterproductive at this point. We all.
I hate this statement. The violence isn't disproportionate. The violence is absolutely out of control. The violence. So I read a report today from the Defense Department. In the opening 2 weeks of the war, Israel employed a large number of 1,000 and 2,000 pound bombs. So 1,000 and 2,000 pound bombs are not insignificantly powerful weapons. However, they're also not useful for destroying tunnels. Like, if I dropped a 1,000 pound bomb on a tunnel system that's 20 meters below the surface, you're laughing in that tunnel system. You're like, ooh, that tickles. 1,000 and 2,000 pound bombs are obscenely good at taking out buildings, though. And the other fact to combine is approximately 40% of the housing in Gaza has now been destroyed, both in northern Gaza, Gaza City proper, and southern Gaza. The other half of that fact is, I don't know if you've ever looked at how airplanes target bombs. What a JDAM is a package that you can equip onto a dumb bomb that turns it into a smart guided bomb. So in order for the JDAM to find a smart target, I have to have a person in the country guiding it in with a laser, or something similar. Or you have to have someone painting the target with a laser. You can do this with an extra airplane. It's kind of hard to do from the airplane that's dropping the bombs because it's maneuvering to drop the bombs. However, if you're looking at these tunnel systems, like if you watched the video in particular we talked about last night, where the Hamas fighter comes out of the tunnel and drops the IED on the tank, the tunnel he comes out from is not much bigger than maybe a meter or two. So you're basically talking Luke Skywalker firing on the Death Star trench exhaust port at this point. I would be very impressed for a pilot to be able to pick out a meter target without someone aiming at it, for them to drop a bomb down one of those tunnels. It would be a near superhuman feat. The other thing to keep in mind is the modern aircraft, the ones that are in use by Israel, all have what's called a lead computing bomb sight. So the best way to describe this, I think, is if you've seen Top Gun, either one, the new one or the old one, and you see the scenes where you see the reticule following the enemy plane during the dogfight sequences. The computer on a modern fighter aircraft computes where the bullet is going to be pulled to as you are maneuvering the nose of the aircraft. So as I go into a left turn on a modern fighter jet, the reticule will be pulled off to the right, because the gravity or the drag will pull the bullets over that way. So in order to hit the target, I have to pull the nose farther than the opposing target in a turn, so that where the bullets falls on the opposing aircraft. This is called the lead computing. It computes the lead required to shoot the target. This works for ground munitions as well. So even if I'm sitting in an airplane with a dumb bomb, if I can see the thing on the ground, the computer will line up the shot for me, so that I just have to put the X on the thing and press the pickle, and the bomb goes down and hits the target. These are not inaccurate weapons. Even a dumb bomb, quote unquote, is not an inaccurate weapon. It will hit a target as long as you put the reticle in the right place, and the computer tells you how to do it. So it seems unlikely to me that we've hit all these houses on accident. That's all I'm saying.
We all agree with that, correct?
Yeah,
Agreed.
yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm not saying it's good, I agree.
Fantastic. So this would be, I tend to be really pragmatic. Whick works with me on stuff. This is my pragmatic suggestion. If you want to form a coalition in the United States and create political pressure on Democrats to not enable the worst kind of abuses and to really put conditions with Netanyahu, something I think we have forfeited and not done a good job with for 16 years now. If you're interested in us having that political point of view represented, it's really important that we take the temperature down and that we don't fall into anti-Semitic tropes, because every second that we are fighting each other about this is one that we can't get to the real issue. I would posit.
Yes, but Brianna, the problem is that you have ignored the real issue of this entire panel. And more to the point, you are not positioned to do that. Let's talk about that for a second. Let's talk about Rebellion Pack for a moment. Rebellion Pack doesn't do much, really. Rebellion Pack gave out a decent amount of money in their first year in 2020, and in 2022 they gave out nearly $250,000. I think over $250,000 to a particular candidate who lost her primary, and then they gave a couple hundred to the candidates in Georgia at the tail end of the special elections that were held for Georgia. Rebellion Pack has not spent assets or resources that gives it an ear to be able to do these things. So, again, when you're setting up a coalition, you are starting from square one, and you need to talk about who is involved in this. And more to the point, I think what Sokdom Left says comes back again to this particular issue, that once we acknowledge it, we need to move on to the actual problem. We can't just keep coming back to the thing because it makes Whick feel like his panties are full. I mean, that's just the fact of the matter, really, when you get down to it. You got to actually address the actual problem. Like, you can't just sit here virtue signaling. Oh, look at me. I yelled about Hamas for 17 days straight. That's just not helpful at this point. What's going to happen with Hamas is going to happen. They're going to get a lot of people killed. They're going to walk out through tunnels into Egypt and come back in 2 years' time, and Israel will do this all over again.
That the same progressive, democratic Jewish people that feel very alienated and hurt by the anti-Semitism right now, I would posit that they are probably going to be some of the strongest, most important allies that we all need for that policy objective. So I think it is in all of our interest that we take the temperature down, acknowledge people's hurt, really stop our own side from doing this stuff, and then refocus on what we want the foreign policy of the United States to do. I think that would be a very...
Again, you have to have actual political power to do that, Brianna. And if you did, you wouldn't be saying this on a Whick panel.
Very pragmatic way forward.
Yeah.
I think to approach this, though, and to properly call out the anti-Semitism, we need to call out the Islamophobia as well, though, right? Because I see a lot of, anti-Palestinian sentiment, which...
I don't even want to get into the massive ball of wax that is whether Palestinians are Arabs or not. Suffice to say, be nice to Palestinians.
Does seem to be rooted in a dislike of Muslims, right? And I feel like if we have these people who are so regularly calling out anti-Semitism, often for things that might not necessarily be rooted in anti-Semitism, like taking down posters that are perceived to be propaganda, like Israeli propaganda, right? A lot of people aren't going to do that with anti-Semitism in their heads. And so therefore, if you continue to apply that everywhere, and then without even acknowledging the other side of it, like the rampant Islamophobia involved with how people treat Palestinians and how people talk about
the Islamophobia involved with putting the posters up in the first place.
People there, I think you're not going to make any progress. So you need to acknowledge both things.
First thing, is my mic better? Is this better?
Yeah, that's much better.
Okay.
Whick.
Okay, just wanted to make that clear. But see, this is max, right? We make all these excuses, right, for the people. Maybe they don't have any hate in their hearts. Maybe it's just propaganda that they're trying to forcibly.
I'm sorry, Trekkie. I didn't see that before. No, we can't put the Brits back in charge. They can't even run Britain. It's falling apart. They had a cabbage that was more popular than the PM for a while.
Rip apart and things like that. Maybe. But then, we got to talk about Islamophobia now. Islamophobia is a real problem. The stuff that's happening in Dearborn is a real problem. But we can't talk about it while at the same time minimizing or making excuses for it. Why can't we just say...
Yeah, but you're treating it like a zero-sum game, Whick. You're saying that if I talk about Islamophobia, I am minimizing anti-Semitism. Which makes me wonder how you understand this dynamic, right? Because anti-Semitism anti-Semitism isn't they're not necessarily going to coincide. Avery the history dog is objecting to me being up so late. Tough. They're not necessarily going to coincide, right? You don't talking about Islamophobia doesn't minimize, and you'll notice that Karl Marx didn't minimize anti-Semitism, but Whick took it to mean that if we need to talk about the other thing, it minimizes the one, and that's not really the case. And more to the point, if you actually accept that as a premise, then you're stuck forever sitting there on a seesaw between October 7th losses and the losses between October 7th and now in Gaza. Worst thing about people like Brianna barking about division when she really means that people with different opinions than her need to fall in line. Yes, and if they don't fall in line, what she'll do is she'll say mean things about them in a private Twitter chat. I'll be perfectly frank about that whole thing. I think what was probably the most repulsive is how she decides to make fun of Doe when Doe has been nothing but an amazingly sweet person. It is fantastic and constantly finds itself attacked by freaking horrible people.
Why can't we simply say, Yeah, the people who
You're
are, if
misascribing
you are ripping
anti-Semitism
off
to
the
things that
posters of kidnapped kids, you're probably a bad person.
No, you're just an angry person. Like, so Whick is deciding now unilaterally that a person who's angry about a thing that happened to him, and like finding out that these two particular individuals had been the victims of Israeli bombings in the past, like they're angry. That doesn't make them bad. Like, anger doesn't make you a bad person. Like, that's just wrong. That's just sick on your part, Whick. You should apologize.
And if you're going around Dearborn talking about hunting down Palestinians, you're probably a bad person. We don't need to run excuse for either of these groups, either of these people, right?
Do you truly not see how anybody could see the posters of missing children who they know are like in Palestine?
Just 1 second. I'm not Jewish, but I would guess that the memories of the Holocaust are really like playing into this for a lot of.
Here's a real problem with bringing that up. Take Hetman. In Hetman's case, that's absolutely true. I don't necessarily think that's true of Israelis generally, at least the ones that are responsible for the propaganda. They're so flippant about it that it really feels wrong. Like the United Nations ambassadors who did the Yellow Stars of David was so flippant and like disrespectful that I was offended. And the other thing is, and if you talk to certain individuals in Israel, they'll bring up how horribly Holocaust survivors get treated in certain circles. First of all, a third of all Holocaust survivors living in Israel are in poverty. Secondly, you have newer generations who blame these survivors for being subject to the Holocaust, who insist that they wouldn't have sat down and died. And I want to kind of highlight that, because me and Lucy talked a couple months back about the Warsaw Ghetto uprising that happened in 1944, where the Jews of the Warsaw Ghetto decided to revolt. Not because they could win their freedom from the Nazis, but because they had to choose how to die. I don't think people really properly grasp how horrifying that statement is. The only option they have is to speed up death just a little by fighting back. And here's the problem I have with the individuals on this panel not being really keyed into this kind of thing, to not really being keyed into the dynamics of Israeli life. They're just talking about what they think people want to hear.
Of Jewish people. So I understand being angry. I understand perceiving this as propaganda. I don't agree, but I think it's
very clearly propaganda. Like,
so counterproductive for any of the policy goals that it sounds like we all agree on, because I think
no, you don't have a roadmap to advance a policy goal. Ergo, you cannot have a thing that's counterproductive to it.
A lot of people are going to interpret this as anti-Semitism. I just want to be honest. I do.
Yeah. So
I'm glad we have Brianna Wu's opinion that something is anti-Semitism. I'd like to consult with someone else, please.
My thing is, I've been on the stance that like Palestinians are Semites and anti-Semitism applies to them as well.
Okay, so strictly speaking, this is correct. Palestinians speak Semitic languages and are Semitic peoples. However, the well understood use of the term is to refer to anti-Judaism, and like I understand what you're saying, but it's not necessarily. The individuals on this panel, particularly Whick and Brianna Wu, are not intellectually sophisticated enough to grapple with the incredibly complex set of ethnic relationships that is in play in Israel.
All this, I don't think it's Islamophobia that's happening to them. And so, like, when
and again, like I said, like before, I don't want to necessarily get into that. Islamophobia is probably a good as word as any, because uh, otherwise we sit here parsing who is when what in what is effectively all ancient Canaanite peoples. Um, it's a game of 23andMe that just dies of boredom.
When people are talking about like no, when people are consistently throwing anti-Semitic at like Arabs and Muslims and the people that are
if we just used anti-Jew, would it help? Like, is it just a word that bothers you?
If we just said
it's honestly not the word. It's like the idea behind the word that like.
And I think there's something to be said here that he didn't say, is that the exclusion of the Palestinian people from the category of Semitic is probably a problem. And that's the thing, like that gets into this whole thing of ethnicity and expression. Like, for example, Judaism is well understood as a religion. So turning around and saying it if is an ethnicity is kind of a weird statement, particularly to Western Christians. So, for example, I was raised Catholic. I'm not anymore, but still, Catholic is a religion. My Catholic is a religion. My ethnicity would be something along the lines of French or Lithuanian or whatever we're choosing to highlight today, because ethnicity is very rarely a straightforward thing. Saying that being a Protestant is ethnicity would be a weird thing to say, but by the same token, there are aspects of being Jewish that manifest in cultural ways. A lot of celebrations, a lot of food that is just incredibly cultural. So I think that it's fair to say that Judaism is kind of very much an ethnicity. Palestinian is an ethnicity, but like you have Jews who have you have Mizrahi Jews, like, and like that's a huge category. Iranians and Egyptians and Sudanese and Jewish people. Like there's ethnicity is rarely straightforward. So like I get the thing, and again, I don't feel like most of the panelists have the sophistication to tackle this topic.
Like we're minimizing the effects that are happening to like Jewish people and like Israeli people, but for some reason no one wants to talk about the minimizing effects that are happening to Palestinians and the Arabs in the town.
Just real quick, what do you mean we're like, look at what happened with the not Al-Aqsa, there was a hospital, right? That wasn't minimized at all.
Okay, this is really disingenuous of Whick. First of all, it is not unreasonable to hear a report of the IDF shelling a hospital and going, yeah, that tracks, particularly when they've been shelling hospitals. So, like, the fact that it got latched onto is unfortunate. But also, here's the thing. It got latched onto in the beginning of the conflict, which is pretty common. For example, if you think back to the February of 2022, when Ukraine was invaded, one of the things that people latched onto the first day and blew up my phone about, because they were so concerned about it and they wanted someone to tell them it was okay, is when Russian forces occupied the Chernobyl exclusion zone. Now, when Russian forces occupied the Chernobyl exclusion zone, if you look on a map and have a basic understanding of military theory, it actually makes sense, outside of the fact that it's Chernobyl and they probably gave themselves radiation poisoning, to hold that position in order to guard the flank of forces trying to encircle Kyiv. Makes perfect sense. I understood it right away. But it was sensationalized in the media because, A, no one knew what the hell was happening yet. Everything was very dramatic. There were firefights happening in Kyiv, troops running all over Ukraine. The ghost of Kyiv was being talked about. Like, this entire thing was like a high drama moment for the media, and they were reporting everything and not really caring about what the details are. The fact that the details turned out to be different in the light of day is unfortunate, but it's not minimizing any kind of problems for the Jewish people. It would be highlighting a much more... I think it's probably more indicative of the fact that people don't trust the IDF to conduct itself in a professional manner.
media, like mainstream media, New York Times, etc., ran with this and blew it up all out of proportion, immediately blaming the IDF, right? Sans any evidence, right? So to act as if the mainstream media is minimizing Palestinian casualties is just counterfactual. We look at this is saying that's actually being looked at through a microscope and being gone over, right? We are all throughout every
a whole lot of talk of Twitter's been depressing me the last couple of weeks, but a whole lot of talk about Twitter has been reaching casualties. And if you're a long-time viewer, you'll know that we do our best not to overblow casualty counts, and to put a dose of hot water. I tend to use the Army's table for casualty counts because it's what I know. So you assume if I have a count of dead, then I multiply that by 3 to get wounded, and other types of casualties, etc. That doesn't work here. First of all, we don't have reliable, necessarily, information coming out of Gaza. The IDF is not necessarily a reliable source of information. Iran is not necessarily a reliable source of information. The casualty counts that are being put out there are probably higher than the reality. However, there are several caveats to this, I think, that are important to talk about. The first is Gaza is in the middle of functionally breaking down. The ability of people in Gaza to even administer it is going to be gone, if it isn't already. So the ability to count casualties accurately is going to go away. Estimates that put casualties at 10,000, probably a little high, but not by much. I would imagine that there's already close to 8,000 dead in Gaza. The problem is that we have seen a lot of people trying to suggest that it's maybe half that, and I don't put another way, given the intensity of the bombing so far, the small size of Gaza, it's going to be high. People are going to lose count. Whatever casualty report we end up with that seems accurate, tack a couple thousand on that when the end comes. And you can say the same thing about Ukraine. Your casualty counts in Ukraine, for example, do not count people who are lost in occupied areas. So there was possibly close to 100,000 people killed in Mariupol when the Russians sieged the city. Not included in the official figures. There is a concerted effort to downplay what's happening in Gaza in order to excuse the IDF. So claiming otherwise is just disingenuous.
Every major news network is calling this shit out, right? I just don't see it. But
and that's also a single anecdotal example and not really indicative of the entire conflict.
Again, we have people on the left, and this is the topic today, running cover for the people who are...
You still haven't said what that means.
Ripping off... We have people on this panel who are running cover for the people going around ripping off posters of kidnapped kids. And
they're not going to find the kids in New York. They're not there. We checked.
I think that's gross. I'm going to be real with you.
I would oppose it. All I would just say is that I think that you are seeing high emotions. So like people are talking about there's threats to Palestinian families.
As murderous and...
Like, why not bring up the fact that a Palestinian child in Illinois was murdered by their landlord, who came in and stabbed them viciously? Nope. Let's minimize that.
In need of
what do you think it portrays the Palestinians or pro-Palestine movement when you see videos of people ripping these posters on? Do you think that...
Whick, they got you. They have you. You are the perfect patsy. Congratulations.
Helps. Do you think that's a good propaganda?
That's why
there's an old George Carlin saying, symbols are for the simple-minded. I kind of tend to feel that way. That encapsulates things pretty well.
am against it optically, right?
No, and I also don't think that's, I think that's a sleight of hand that is not very helpful for helping people understand this.
Well, negativity towards, I definitely do. Israel doesn't know. And that's like, we're talking about what they're doing, right?
Well, yeah, I guess I can see where you're coming from. Like when they're willing, like what was it 2 days ago, to kill 4,000 civilians to get one Hamas commander? It's kind of hard.
Okay, first of all, again, in order to kill 4,000 people with one bomb, you'd have to stack them on top of one another. Doesn't work like that. A 1,000-pound or 2,000-pound bomb hitting you in the face is going to ruin your day real quick. But it's your house is gone, not necessarily. We've wiped out your entire block.
Yeah, I mean, they actually think they're all animals,
How
right?
many was it? Has that been updated?
Well, it just wasn't.
It wasn't 4,000. That's just not reasonable. What's up, Bubba? Okay, go lay down. You're a good baby. Sorry. Dogs are very precious, but also impatient.
4,000, like some number in the hundreds. That's all.
Oh,
yeah,
thank God. Oh, thank God.
Hundred,
Yeah, it was, I think 400. No.
Still bad, right?
Yeah, I just want to put a pin in that.
People.
Like when we were saying, oh, it was
Yes, let's put a pin in the talking about Gazan casualties again.
hundreds and not thousands. Oh, thank God is a, you know, this is a state we're at. Like it's
Right.
No, it's not, because no one who has any idea what they're talking about is going to think that 4,000 is an accurate number. Like 4,000 would sound outrageous to most casual viewers.
That's where we're at, though. Now we're at that point where we're like being thankful that it's not 1,000 and it's 100.
Yeah.
It will be
very
thousand. I mean, or has been.
And that's
what
why
I would
think,
say-
that's why I think you're seeing like these emotions being so high in the conflict is like you're seeing.
I don't know. I think, you know, it's, I just want to make y'all aware, you're falling into a lot of stereotypes and statements, like assuming like Jewish propaganda. I mean, just a lot.
Again, you have to quantify that. You can't just dismiss it out of hand.
A lot of stuff that
Wait,
I gotta
you
tell
saying
you.
Israel just doesn't make propaganda? What are you trying to say? What do you mean by that?
I think all nations make propaganda, but it's
Yeah.
like,
So
well, let her finish and then you can respond. Go ahead.
I don't know. I really feel
I don't know is the first honest thing you said on this panel, Brianna.
the hurt here, and I genuinely appreciate the chance to engage with both of you on this.
That wasn't an answer.
I really hear that and acknowledge it. At the same time, I just want to be honest and say the way you're talking about Israel and the Israeli people, it just feels kind of dehumanizing.
not the Israeli people.
Right?
I have Israeli friends. I went to
Yeah, this is a very dishonest and despicable ploy by Brianna Wu. She is not fit for purpose for these kinds of things.
Israel a few years ago. I'm good. I know, like, yeah.
And this is the thing too. Like Brianna Wu launches into a racist trope, which launches Karl Marx into a racist trope, where he says, "I have Israeli friends." Like, okay, like you put him there. Like, just be an honest interlocutor, Brianna. Like, admit that you don't know what the hell you're talking about and bow out.
Young Israeli people who are anti-Netanyahu and are
got many
totally...
So a really close friend of mine that I work with was actually in Israel on.
All right, it's been an hour and a half, but I think you get the idea of what I'm driving at here. If you want to watch the rest of the panel, have a ball. It's over on Whick's channel. It's kind of a nightmare. I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. We are going to hopefully, I have to finalize this, but hopefully Tuesday we're going to talk about the developments in Ukraine. It's been a very busy day. The Russian Navy got smacked around again by the Ukrainians, which is getting really embarrassing at this point because they don't have their own navy. So I want to thank everybody again. Have a good evening.